Every sport has its hard men, but rugby had players who took it to another level. Stick around because our last player is the man who transformed his nation into a worldwide symbol of strength, shaping the fear factor that still defines them today. Andy Ripley? Andy Ripley looked different from the moment he stepped on a pitch. He wasn't your typical 1970s forward. He was 6'4", built like a tree, and could run like a centre. Between 1972 and 1976, he played 24 times for England and went on the brutal 1974 Lions tour of South Africa, where he showed the world exactly what a freak of nature he was. Ripley had these long legs that just ate up the ground. Once he got going, defenders bounced off him like pinballs. Trying to bring him down was like trying to tackle a runaway bus. You knew the hit was coming, but you were still going to end up on the floor. And the best part, he didn't just smash people, he had style while doing it. The flowing hair, the trademark headband, the cheeky grin. Ripley looked like he was having the time of his life while everyone else was hanging on for dear life. He could run, he could hit, and he could wind you up all in the same play. For England, he became a fan favourite. For the Lions, he was part of one of the nastiest packs ever assembled. Andy Ripley wasn't just a back rower, he was a one-man demolition team. Fran Cotton. From 1971 to 1981, Fran Cotton was one of those players who seemed immovable, like he was carved from stone. Wearing the white of England, he made his name in the front row, where games are won and lost in the dark, unseen battles of scrums and mauls. Cotton thrived in those contests. He wasn't flashy, but he didn't need to be. His strength and stability gave England a platform, and opponents knew they'd have to endure a long day whenever he lined up opposite them. People still talk about that one game on the 1977 Lions tour where Fran was covered head to toe in mud and his face was absolutely caked. It was the kind of photo a fan would pull out laughing and say, "That's the Mudman right there." That muddy picture became the main reason he got nicknamed the Mudman. On the field, Fran was fearless. He tackled hard, punched when he had to, and never shied away from the rougher side of the game. Opponents dreaded meeting him head-on because they knew they'd lose. Down in New Zealand, the local press even featured him in their Beast of the Week article more than once, a sign of just how much his name had spread and how well he was known on both sides of the world. Yet like all the truly hard men of rugby, he could take it just as well as he gave it. No matter how brutal the exchanges became, Cotton always stood tall, ready for more. But toughness for Cotton wasn't just about brute strength, it was also about loyalty to his teammates, to his jersey, and to the fight in front of him. He carried himself with a kind of quiet intensity that made people respect him, even if they feared him. Graham Price. Graham Price is remembered as one of the toughest men ever to put on a Welsh jersey. Playing at prop from 1975 to 1983, he was the sort of player who set the tone before a ball was even kicked. His reputation came from more than just his ability to hold the line. Price had a way of delivering tackles that rattled the bones of anyone unlucky enough to run into him, and yet he made it look routine. He seemed unshakable, like nothing could wear him down, no matter how long the match dragged on. His determination was written across his face, a constant reminder that rugby, to him, was as much about heart as it was about skill. Before games, opponents admitted they feared him, not just for what he might do in open play, but because they knew he would never take a backward step. Price was the kind of man who shrugged off injuries, taped himself up, and kept going. His toughness wasn't just physical, it was mental. He led with quiet resilience, showing teammates that pain was temporary, but pride in the jersey lasted forever. In many ways, he embodied what it meant to be Welsh. He was strong, stubborn, and fiercely proud. Willie John McBride. Willie McBride wasn't just tough, he was the sheriff. Playing lock for Ireland from 1962 to 1975, he picked up 63 caps and captained the British and Irish Lions on that famous 1974 tour of South Africa, and that's where his reputation went from big to legendary. He was the man behind the 99 call. If one Lion got punched, all 15 piled in. Simple as that, it was pure chaos and pure genius, because the ref couldn't send off an entire team. Opponents quickly realised that taking a cheap shot meant waking up the whole pack, and no one fancied that fight. But McBride wasn't just swinging fists. He was smart in the line-out, ruthless in the scrums and rucks, and he could sense when a game needed steel. He made 17 Lions Test appearances, more than anyone else in history, which tells you just how much he was trusted. Teammates loved him, opponents feared him, and when you've got a bloke leading the charge with that kind of presence, you understand why the Lions went unbeaten on that tour. Willie John McBride wasn't just a player, he was the enforcer every team wishes they had. Fergus Slattery. Fergus Slattery was a flanker built for mayhem, playing for Ireland through the 70s. He earned 61 caps and carved out a reputation as one of the hardest back rowers of his time. He was also right in the thick of the 1974 Lions tour, the one where McBride rolled out the 99 call. Slattery wasn't there for show. He was the bloke who hit every ruck, made every tackle, and left you sore for the next week. He had this knack for being everywhere, the kind of player you couldn't escape. And if you crossed him, he'd make sure you knew about it the next time you touched the ball. What really made him feared was how much he enjoyed the rough stuff. The scraps on the floor, the swinging boots in the rucks, the little off-the-ball digs. Slattery lived for it, and when matches turned nasty, he always looked like he was having the best day of his life. Irish fans loved him, opponents dreaded him, and on that brutal Lions tour, he cemented his place as one of rugby's true hard men. Fergus Slattery wasn't just tough. He was the kind of flanker who made you wish the ball never came near you. Frank Oliver wasn't the kind of player who tiptoed into a rugby match. He crashed in like a storm that nobody could control. People said he played with a mix of cunning and physical thunder, and that wasn't an exaggeration. He played from 1976 to 1981, and he knew how to read the game better than anyone else. He also knew how to hurt you in the process. In the lineouts, he barged into opponents with such raw aggression that it felt like he was trying to break down walls rather than win a ball. Disruption was his art, and he did it with ease. Matches with Oliver weren't gentle contests, as they felt like battlefields. Some players compared them to war zones, and it wasn't just a metaphor. He thrived on chaos, stirring things up until even the calmest opponents lost their heads. His own teammates both loved him and dreaded him, giving him the nickname Filthy Frank. It stuck, not because he was unskilled, but because he relished the darker arts of rugby. Oliver wasn't just a brute, though. He had brains to back up the brawn, especially when it came to scrum battles. He set traps, lured players into mistakes, and then slammed them into submission. It was an intimidating mix that included part strategist and part enforcer. Watching him meant watching rugby stripped down to its most primal form of strength, willpower, and a dash of mischief. Alain Esteve. In French rugby folklore, few names stir up as much fear as Alain Esteve. Playing in the 1970s, he was known as the Beast of Béziers, and anyone who ever had to pack down against him understood exactly why. This was a man who treated rugby not as a sport, but as a battlefield where only the hardest survived, and in his era, referees often turned a blind eye to the chaos, which gave Esteve free rein to unleash his wildest instincts. He wasn't content with just playing hard. Esteve punched, kicked, and raked rucks with a kind of savage determination that left bodies on the ground. He seemed to thrive on the intimidation factor, staring men down in scrums until they looked away. Hookers especially dreaded being anywhere near him because Esteve had a reputation for making life miserable in the tight exchanges, but what set him apart was that he didn't just dish it out, he could take it too. There's the famous story where he was kicked square in the face, blood running down, but instead of losing his edge, he just grinned. That kind of response only deepened the myth around him. He was a warrior who seemed to enjoy the suffering as much as the fight itself. French rugby in that period was already known for its edge, but Esteve embodied its rawest form. He made matches feel dangerous, and people loved him for it. Michel Palmié. If Alain Esteve was feared, Michel Palmié was downright notorious. In the 1970s, he played French rugby at its roughest, in an age when discipline often lagged behind the fury of the game. Palmié developed a reputation as one of the dirtiest, most feared players on the field, and it wasn't by accident. He didn't shy away from violence. He embraced it. Palmié's career was littered with bans and suspensions, but that didn't slow him down. One of his most infamous moments came when he opened up a player's head with a blow so brutal it left a 4-inch cut. Blood poured and stitches followed, but Palmié just carried on as if nothing unusual had happened. That was his approach. For him, rugby was war, and he was more than willing to spill blood, even his own. He wore injuries like badges of honour, serving as proof that he'd given everything in the fight. Fans might not have called him elegant, but they certainly called him tough. Funny enough, Palmié later transitioned into rugby's administrative world, joining the federation as if his on-field chaos had never happened. But if you thought Palmié was tough, just wait until I tell you about another French titan who took brutality to new levels. Gerard Cholley. Gerard Cholley of France had a rugby career that spanned from 1975 to 1979, but he wasn't just another rugby player. He carried with him the raw intimidation of professional boxing, a sport he did long before hitting the rugby field. Yes, before he even stepped onto the pitch, Cholley had already carved out a reputation in the ring, and that reputation followed him everywhere. In fact, his story about vaulting into rugby after a legendary bar fight almost sounds like folklore. Picture a smoky room, fists flying, and Cholley standing tall at the end, bruised maybe, but unbroken. That was the moment people realised he belonged in a sport where confrontation was the very currency of success. On the field, Cholley wasn't the type to ease into a game. Even during warm-ups, he seemed like he was itching for someone to test him. Teammates would swear he was already squared up, while daring the opposition to take the first swing. At kickoff, that stare of his could slice through a man's composure, because you didn't just play against Gerard Cholley, you survived him. In scrums, he looked like a mountain that had decided to lean forward, crushing and twisting until the opposition wilted. And when the fog rolled across the pitch with fists clenched and eyes burning, Cholley looked less like an athlete and more like a general marching into battle. Even after the whistle blew, his aura still stuck around. His opponents fearfully remembered his presence long after the bruises faded. Brian Moore. Brian Moore might not have been the biggest hooker England ever had, but he was definitely the angriest. From 1987 to 1995, he racked up 64 caps, multiple Lions tours, and earned himself the nickname Pitbull. And trust me, it fit. Moore had this constant scowl like he'd just been told the pub had run out of beer. He was always in someone's ear, referees, opponents, even his own teammates if they weren't up to scratch, and he loved it. He thrived on being the nuisance that nobody could switch off from, but don't think it was all noise. Moore could play. His scrummaging was hard as nails, his line-out throws were reliable, and he was fit enough to keep snarling from the first whistle to the last. That combination made him the heartbeat of those Grand Slam winning packs in the early 90s. If he was on your team, you adored him. If you had to play against him, you couldn't stand him. And if you were the referee, well, you probably wished you'd called in sick. Brian Moore was relentless, fiery, and absolutely one of rugby's most feared hookers. Colin Meads. If there's one name that still echoes in rugby history, it's Colin Meads. Known simply as Pine Tree, he was the fiercest second-row New Zealand ever produced. Active from 1957 to 1971, he didn't just play rugby, he redefined what it meant to be a hard man on the field. Opponents respected him, but they also feared him because Meads didn't take nonsense from anyone. If you crossed him, you'd feel it immediately. One of the most famous stories about Meads comes from when he literally ripped a player's hamstring and groin during a tackle. Most men wouldn't even dream of that level of physical brutality, but Meads shrugged it off like just another day's work. The incredible part is that he himself often played through serious pain. Broken bones, torn muscles, you name it. Meads carried it all forward without ever showing weakness. Raw doesn't even begin to cover his style. Meads was a pure, unpolished force, the kind of player who treated every match like a test of survival. He didn't rely on trickery or cheap shots, he just kept hammering away until the other side cracked. Fans adored him because he represented that gritty, never-say-die Kiwi mentality. But what really made him legendary was how he balanced all that toughness with leadership. He wasn't just a bruiser, he was also someone who set the tone for his team. His aura alone could lift players up or crush an opponent's confidence. That sort of mythical presence is rare. Now, speaking of setting the tone, hold tight because next up is a bloke who didn't just bring toughness to the field, he led it. Wayne "Buck" Shelford. Wayne Shelford wasn't just an All Black, he was the bloke who put fear into people before the ball was even kicked. From 1986 to 1990, he wore the black jersey and left a trail of bruises everywhere he went. And if you want the full Buck experience, you start in Nantes, 1986. The Battle of Nantes, they called it, France versus New Zealand, but it looked more like trench warfare. In the middle of it all, Buck cops a boot that tears his scrotum open, loses a handful of teeth, and still tells the medic to stitch him up so he can carry on. Who does that? Only Buck. That game didn't just make him a hero, it made him immortal. But he wasn't just about the carnage. Buck was the heartbeat of the All Blacks' 1987 World Cup win, smashing through 5 of their 6 games and helping lift the first ever Webb Ellis trophy. Then, when he took over as captain, the All Blacks went 3 years without losing a test. 3 years. Nobody touched them. And then there's the haka. Before Buck, it was half-baked, a bit of a mumble and stomp. Buck wasn't having that. He told the lads, either we do it properly or we don't do it at all. So he drilled them, the words, the actions, the meaning, even dragged the team off to Teote College to learn the real mana behind it. By the time they unleashed it at the 1987 World Cup on home soil, the haka wasn't a pre-match dance anymore. It was a warning siren. That's why Buck was feared. He wasn't dirty. He didn't need cheap shots. He had presence. He hit like a runaway truck, stared through you like glass, and carried himself like a man you never ever wanted to cross. Fans still chant "Bring back Buck" for a reason, and honestly, Buck's the reason the haka is what it is today. Before him, it was a bit half-hearted. Now it's the most iconic side in rugby. He made it fierce, he made it real, and he made it something something the whole world still talks about. That's Buck Shelford for you, a legend, an enforcer, and the kind of bloke who made his team feel unbeatable. If you enjoyed this, there's plenty more rugby videos in the works. I'd really appreciate it if you hit subscribe. Thanks for watching.